Welcome to Daily Book Insight. Today, we're taking a deep, critical look at a book that is, without a doubt, a global phenomenon. Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens. This is a book that's done more than just sell well. It's genuinely reshaped how millions of us think about our own history. And we're here to explore not just why it's so celebrated, but also why it's so controversial.
Just look at that number. Over 20 million copies sold worldwide. That's just staggering. This isn't just a book anymore. It's a full-on cultural event. It has fundamentally shaped how an entire generation thinks about where we came from. And, any book with that kind of impact is bound to spark some intense debate. And that's exactly what we're going to get into.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to break down the book's biggest, most powerful ideas, and also look at the major criticisms they've run into. We'll start with why Sapiens became such a huge deal, then dive right into its core idea about shared stories. After that, we'll tackle its take on morality, the so-called myth of progress, the future of humanism, and finally, land on the huge question the book leaves us all with.
So, first things first. What made Sapiens blow up the way it did? I think a huge part of its appeal is just its sheer ambition. I mean, come on. Taking on the entire history of our species, from our very beginnings all the way to, well, right now. For so many people, it was this wonderful breath of fresh air. A clear, simple story about our incredibly complex past.
Okay, at the very heart of Sapiens, there's one single, foundational idea. If you get this one thing, it pretty much unlocks Harari's entire argument about how human society works. It's this powerful concept that explains how we as a species have been able to cooperate on such a massive scale. And it all boils down to the power of stories.
So Harari basically breaks reality down into three layers. First, you've got objective reality. Think gravity, rocks, trees, stuff that exists whether we believe in it or not. Then there's subjective reality. My personal feelings, your thoughts. But the real magic happens in this third layer, intersubjective reality. These are things that exist only because a whole bunch of us believe in them together.
And this is where you really see how powerful that idea is. Just think about it. Money, nations, laws, even corporations. None of these things physically exist in the world. A dollar bill is just paper, right? But we all agree it has value. According to Harari, our unique ability to believe in these imagined orders is what let us break past the 150-person limit of a small tribe and cooperate by the millions.
And here's the really fascinating part. We get so deep into these stories that we completely forget we're the ones who made them up. We start treating them like they're objective truths, like they're just part of the natural world. Harari argues this is how everything, from ancient kingdoms to modern capitalism, works, by making us believe its rules are just natural and, well, inevitable.
Okay, this brings us to one of the most hotly debated parts of Sapiens, where our ideas of right and wrong actually come from. Harari's arguments here have really sparked some serious pushback, and when you hear them, you'll probably understand why.
Harari's argument is actually pretty simple, but it's also incredibly radical. He basically says that science can tell us what is, the facts of the universe, but it can never tell us what we ought to do, what's morally right or wrong. For Harari, any moral system is really just another kind of intersubjective story, a form of religion we all agree to follow.
This quote really gets to the absolute core of his point. From a purely scientific, factual perspective, you can't prove that murder is wrong. Harari's claim is that any value judgment like that has to come from a shared story, a basic belief that we just accept as true without needing scientific proof. And this is exactly where the critics jump in. The philosopher Jeffrey Irving, for example, argues that Harari is really oversimplifying how our morals work. He suggests our beliefs are layered, so you can logically derive murder is wrong from a more fundamental value like, say, a functioning society shouldn't collapse. From this point of view, our moral rules aren't just random stories. They're actually built on a foundation of core shared values. All right, next up, let's talk about one of Harari's most famous and probably most counterintuitive arguments, the idea that the agricultural revolution, which we usually see as this huge leap forward for humanity, was actually a trap, a disaster even, for the average person.
And this chart illustrates his point perfectly. Yeah, sure. Agriculture led to a massive population boom for Homo sapiens as a species, but the life of the average farmer, it was often way harder. They worked longer hours, they ate a much less varied diet, mostly just grains, and they were way more likely to get sick. So, big win for the species, but kind of a raw deal for the individual.
Now, while that argument is really compelling, it also points to a common criticism of Sapiens.
A lot of experts have pointed out what they see as a pattern of factual errors or big oversimplifications. For instance, Harari apparently presents a debunked theory about the caste system's origins as fact. He calls Augustus Caesar militarily incompetent, which kind of glosses over his successes. The charge from critics is that these little inaccuracies are used to make the big story flow better, but it comes at the cost of real historical nuance.
All right, this all builds to Harari's dramatic climax, where he argues that our dominant modern religion, our main shared story, which is liberal humanism, is facing a total existential threat. So here's how his logic goes. Humanism's mantra has always been look inside, trust your feelings, follow your heart. But modern science is starting to tell us there's no magical self in there. It's just a bunch of biological algorithms, genes, and hormones. And as technology gets better, external algorithms from Google, from Amazon, are going to know our inner workings better than we do. So Harari asks, at that point, why on earth would we trust ourselves over the algorithm? But again, critics like Jeffrey Irving offer a different take. He says, hang on, the whole look inside idea is really based on two principles. Principle A is that you know yourself best. Okay, maybe that one is dissolving as AI gets smarter. But principle B is that an outsider doesn't necessarily have your best interests at heart. And that's still very, very true. So maybe we don't have to throw out humanism entirely. Maybe we just need to adapt it to fight this new power imbalance. And this brings us to probably the sharpest and most serious criticism of Harari's whole project. If you really follow his logic to its conclusion, if human rights are just stories, if the only thing that matters is evolutionary success, some people argue you end up with a worldview that is, well, horrifying. It's a philosophy that can feel deeply nihilistic and ethically dangerous. So all of this brings us to Harari's final mind-bending question about the future of humanity. He predicts that we are getting so powerful that we're about to transform ourselves with technology, essentially bringing an end to Homo sapiens as we've known ourselves for millennia. And he suggests a potential successor to humanism could be something he calls dataism. In this worldview, the entire universe is just a flow of data, and our ultimate purpose, the highest good, is to contribute to that flow, to process more and more information. In a dataist future, individual humans aren't the center of the universe anymore. We're just tiny chips in a giant information processing system. But as you might guess, critics see a huge flaw here. According to basic information theory, you can't have data without a way to separate it from meaningless noise. You need a pre-existing value system to decide what information is actually important. Without that, the whole idea of dataism kind of falls apart on the launchpad. It comes, as they say, pre-dissolved.
So after all that, what's the final takeaway on Sapiens? Well, there's no denying it's a masterful, incredibly compelling book. It gives us powerful mental tools like intersubjective reality to make sense of our world. But, and this is a big but, its greatest strength, that beautiful simplicity, is also its greatest weakness. Critics argue it comes at the cost of factual accuracy and leads to a philosophical outlook that many people find unsettling and even dangerous.
But in the end, Sapiens does what all truly great books do. It makes you think. It forces you to realize that we are the ones writing our own realities, creating our own shared myths. And it leaves us with this final, profound question. As we gain godlike powers to rewrite our own biology and reshape our world, what story do we actually want to become?
If you found this deep dive valuable, please like, subscribe, and share it with your family and friends who want to upgrade their life. Thanks for joining us for this Daily Book Insight.